Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Power of Food podcast. Leah here with a very special guest today, Chloe Skerlak. Chloe is a certified full spectrum fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner, aka, she's wildly passionate about the menstrual cycle. She's charted her own cycle for 12 years and has 6 years of experience teaching fertility awareness education to people who want to achieve or avoid pregnancy without medical intervention, understand themselves and their health better, and live life more cyclically. Infused with joy, laughter, and play, Chloe's classes help people regain their sexual and reproductive sovereignty, become advocates for their own health, and live vibrant, healthy lives. She also loves full moon bathing, any kind of partner dancing, and taking photos of cervixes. Welcome to the Power of Food, Chloe. So happy you're here.
Thanks for having me. I'm so happy to meet you.
Amazing. Well, I'm really, really looking forward to this chat. We have not had anyone on the podcast yet to talk about this, and it is a topic that is so fascinating and so important for all women. And you are just such a light and a joy, and I'm so excited to have you on to talk about this. And Chloe and I are actually teaching a workshop together on May 23rd, which everyone should come sign up for. It's all about getting off birth control and how to support your body getting off birth control and how to start tracking your cycles, which is what Chloe is going to talk all about today. So you can get a little taste of her, and I'm sure you will run to go sign up after hearing her passion about this topic. So, Chloe, I would love to start off with you just telling our guests kind of briefly how you got into this. Like, what sparked this interest, and how did you go down this path essentially?
Yeah, well, I always tell people that I started for the birth control, but I stayed for the body literacy. So it
Mm,
was, over 10 years ago, when I was in my early 20s, I was looking for a hormone-free contraception. And just looking at all of the options, it's like really asking yourself, how do you like your hormones? Right? In a patch, in an IUD, in a pill. And I thought, this is ridiculous. Like, there must be a way that we can do this without hormones. Um, I was really lucky. I never had painful periods. My cycles were really regular. I used to be that girl who used to boast that you would never know if I was on my period or not because everything just seemed fine. And I was using condoms when I was having sex. And so I just intuitively never wanted to be on hormonal birth control. But I was with a partner who had had an unplanned pregnancy with someone. And so he
mm,
insisted that I go on the pill. And I remember I had at this point I was 23. So I'd already had friends and stories that I'd heard from my community about people not reacting very well on hormonal birth control. So I had created this manifestation letter of I'm going to lose weight on the pill, and my face is going to be super clear, and I'm going to have all of this unpredicted sex with my boyfriend, and it's going to be amazing. Anyways, the manifestation letter did not work.
oh no.
It didn't even last a year. I hated it so much. And so I actually went to my doctor to say yeah, it's not working. And she's like, oh, no worries. Let's try a different one. So then we tried a different one. And then the same thing. I was like, no, I don't like this. Oh, let's try a different one. So it was actually, I'll never forget the day that I realized I can't do this anymore. And I was trying to get into the garage with my key. I was trying to unlock the garage door and I couldn't get my key in. And I was so frustrated. I burst into tears and I melted onto my sidewalk and I cried for 15 minutes. And that's when I realized I was like, something is wrong. This is not okay. This is not okay. I had a lot of physical symptoms, my hair was falling out. I actually had worse acne on the pill than off of it, but it was the mood stuff.
Mm,
And I would think about all of the people who've been on the pill for years and decades and don't realize that,
mhm.
if you're not an anxious person, it's the pill. You don't have to feel all of this depression, it's the pill. And so I actually went to a Medi center, here in Canada. I'd have to wait a couple of weeks, maybe even months to get an appointment with my doctor. But I just drove myself to a Medi center where you can just walk in. And I'll never forget, this old man was the doctor. And then he's like, what can I do for you? I'm like, I don't want to be on the pill. And he's like, then don't. I'm like, what? Just don't be on the pill? And he's like, yeah, what's the problem? I'm like, well, my acne, la 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 la. And so he gave me an acne cream. And he's like, then stop. I'm like, but I haven't finished this pill packet yet. And he's like, it's okay. I was like, "What? Nobody." I don't know if it was his lack of interest in, like, my
Right.
sexual health or what, but I was just yeah, I'll never like, I thank him so much for just his aloofness. But I remember I was off the pill for, like, 3 days, and I started to already feel like myself, and that was it,
Wow.
and then I never looked
Oh
back.
my goodness.
But then it was like, "Okay, but now what?
Mhm.
But now what?" So, that's when I discovered fertility awareness, and it was definitely, a journey. So, I thought about the Nuva ring, I thought about the
Mhm.
IUD. You hear about these
Mhm.
localized, right,
Right.
low hormone options. It's not like we haven't heard of the bloodstream before,
Mhm.
but, I actually found fertility awareness through the church.
Wow.
Mhm. So my cousin was getting married, and she's getting married in the Catholic Church, and so,
Mhm.
it's mandatory to do a marriage prep when you get married in the Catholic Church, and in this marriage prep course, they teach you all about natural family planning, which is planning your family by understanding when you're fertile and when you're not using your cervical mucus. So my cousin knew that I was having this difficulty with the pill, and she said, "Chloe, you need to call this woman." And it was a woman who was here in my city. I called her. I met with her a few times in her basement, and I will forever be grateful for her for teaching me how to chart my cycles. Yeah.
Wow.
Mhm.
So many women, myself included, I feel like have that exact same story with the birth control, minus the aloof old man, and they're still on it. Like I mean, I had the same thing. Like you go and the doctor's like, "Oh, well, just try this other one. Try these other hormones." It's never a conversation of like, "Oh, do you actually want to be on hormones, on birth control?" And never the conversation of like, this is what's actually happening in your body, right? Like, this is why you're actually stressed out, anxious, your skin's horrible, like, you just don't feel
Mhm.
like yourself, you have no libido, like, all of these things that, like you said, like, women are just on it for so long, you think it's you, and you don't realize that it's actually just the birth control, which is just
Mhm.
mind boggling. And so I think also, and I struggled with this too, is it's so frustrating when you feel like there isn't a good option, right? It's like every single option has problems. And
Mhm.
that's why FAM or fertility awareness is so interesting to me and why I'm so happy you're here to talk about it because like it really seems like there's no downsides. Like it kind of seems almost like too good to be true. And so I'm so excited to talk more about it. And so why don't you just tell us a little bit, especially for our listeners that are like, what the heck is this? Tell us a little bit about like the basics of fertility awareness, how it works, who it's for, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Great. Yeah. So, the fertility awareness method of contraception is a non hormonal method of avoiding pregnancy by paying attention to the changes in your signs of fertility on a daily basis. So, every day I listen to my body and I decide at the end of the day, based on what I've observed and felt, am I fertile today or not? Because we're actually only fertile 6 days per cycle. Mhm. So when you release an egg, which is ovulation, that egg lives for 24 hours, 12 to 24 hours. It's like a miracle we get pregnant at all.
Right? This is like one of those
Mhm.
things that astounds women, right? Because we're always told the onus is on us, like, oh, we could get pregnant any day of the year, right? And therefore, all of the, birth control and all of that, it's like our responsibility. And in reality, like 6 days every month, that's crazy. It's
I know.
totally crazy.
I was actually
Yeah,
talking to a guy not too long ago about the fact that men are fertile every single day, right?
exactly.
And they like release like thousands, billions of sperm like in a day if they wanted
Yeah,
to. So why aren't they on the birth control? And he
right?
made a good point. Like he did say it's easier to control one egg than billions and billions of sperm. And I was kind of like, huh. But at the same time, I mean, I'm not an advocate for like changing or controlling anybody's fertility, but
Right.
it was an interesting point he made because we only release that one egg,
Right, right.
right? And so however, we're fertile for 6 days. So the other 5 days comes from the fact that your body becomes a hotel for sperm and essentially opens up and becomes sperm friendly to allow sperm to come into your cervix. So that's the lower portion of your uterus and to live for up to 5 days there, waiting for ovulation to occur. So when you start to pay attention to the changes of the cervical mucus, you can start to become actually aware, like, is my cervix open or not? Is my body favorable to sperm right now? Am I getting closer to ovulation? Because you can't actually confirm ovulation until after it's happened. So the first biomarker that you chart in a fertility awareness practice is mucus, is cervical mucus. And so when you see the cervical mucus, you know that your cervix is open and that you are allowing sperm into your body. And you also know that that means estrogen levels are high, and so you're on your way to ovulation. That's what that means. After you ovulate, your cervical mucus will return back to its infertile state, which typically is dry and nothing, but can be various for different people. And your temperature will rise, and it will stay high for the remainder of the cycle. That's how you confirm, yes, ovulation has occurred. So I used to get really angry too when I would think about how they, school or parents or teachers or people would, doctors even would tell us, like, we're fertile every single day, we're capable of getting
Mhm.
pregnant every single day. And yeah, I was like, that's not true. And I don't like that. But at the same time, when I started teaching this and teaching the very important rule is the when in doubt rule. So when in doubt, consider yourself fertile. That's the
Mhm.
rule that we have in practicing fertility awareness. Consider yourself fertile and consider the next 3 days fertile. That's the rule.
Mhm. Mhm.
So if you're not charting, then every single day is in doubt.
Right.
So it's actually a pretty responsible thing to assume that you're fertile every single day if you're not aware of the changes of
Mhm.
your fertility or not. But that's what a fertility awareness practice can do, is it can make you aware. Is you
Mhm.
can learn to tease out and identify your fertile and infertile days. And that's what
Amazing.
fertility awareness is. Yeah. So
And it
people
makes
Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it makes so much sense. Like it's I feel like once you start to learn about this, you're just like, "Of course." Like, "Of course that makes sense. Why are we not taught this in school? Like, why does no one tell us this stuff?"
Mhm. Yeah. And that's why I get really excited about teaching the young ones. So I'm a full spectrum
Mm,
fertility awareness educator. So I teach from like your first period to your last. So I put on
amazing.
period positivity workshops for the kids because, yeah, every single client or every single person I've ever taught fertility awareness has always said, I wish I knew this sooner.
Yeah.
And it's for, and FAM can be for everyone. And the intentions actually change. So avoiding pregnancy is actually like the cherry on the top of what I consider like the ice cream of fertility awareness. So the body literacy, the knowledge that you gain about yourself and your health is like the real like meat and potatoes. That's like the real ice cream of practicing FAB. The fact that we can understand when we're fertile, when we're not, and use this information to avoid pregnancy or achieve pregnancy without
Mhm.
medical intervention is just the extra stuff. Mhm. So
It's
people
so
use it.
true. Well, I was just gonna say it's so true because even with ovulation, like a lot of times people assume, and I talk with clients about this a lot, like we want you ovulating. I don't care if you want to get
Mm,
pregnant or not. Like ovulation is the hallmark of health as a woman. And so even just to know, like, okay, yes, I ovulated this month, or no, I didn't ovulate
mhm,
this month. And what was I doing that contributed to that or that didn't? And then you can kind of like go backwards and track your steps. And so, yes, of course, like preventing or achieving pregnancy, that's I think why a lot of people start it. But then learning about your body more and learning how to live in that cyclical way is so, so empowering and free information, basically. Like it's amazing, truly, to be able to confirm or know that you did not ovulate. And a lot of women have absolutely no idea.
mhm. Not to mention that we think that if we're bleeding, we're ovulating, but that's not
Right,
true.
right.
So, a true menstruation is a bleeding event that follows ovulation by about 2 weeks. But if you're
Mhm,
not confirming ovulation, then you can't confirm that this bleed is a true menstruation. It could be an
right.
estrogen breakthrough bleed, it could be a withdrawal bleed, it could be ovulatory spotting. So, yeah, it's absolutely having like that power in your own hands, like that
Mhm.
advocacy for yourself to be able to know. And I mean, I know because I know you're like a little globetrotter right now, and you're doing your own stint traveling all over the world. I used to call myself the cycle savvy globetrotter, and people are like,
Oh, I
"Whoa,
love
you
that.
ride your bike around the world?" And I'm like, "No, the menstrual cycle." I actually graduated from the Justice College. So I essentially have my master's in the menstrual cycle. And I graduated
Mhm.
from that 2-year program while I was living in Vietnam. And
Wow.
so I had traveled, yeah, and all over the world. And it was really cool to see how my own cycles changed based on
Mm,
the country I was living in, the food that I was eating, the relationships I was in. Like, it's
mhm.
incredible. Sometimes my favorite luteal phase activity is just to put all of my charts. I've charted on paper every single cycle for 12 years, and I have every single
Wow.
chart still. And I love to just put it all over the floor, just look at them. I'm like, wow,
I
look how
love it.
different, my life was when I was living in Thailand, or how different my charts were when, I had broken up with my boyfriend, or how different my charts
Mhm,
were, right? And I just love to look at them because you're right. There's such a beautiful biofeedback tool for yourself. Yeah.
mhm. Yeah. So amazing. Yeah, I think too, we as women, we just assume we're like robots and it should be the same every month, right? So
Mhm.
I'm so glad you shed light on that and that like different life events, different locations, different ways of eating, it's going to fluctuate, even just your age and all of that, even the season, time of year, like all of these things can impact it. So that's really amazing that you have all of them. I love that. Um I would love to go back to something you said before about cervical fluid and temperature because with them, there's a lot of companies now who are, coming onto this topic, right? And they have thermometers and they have different things and there's a lot of apps where people track their cycles and a lot of times it's just based on temperature. And so they're saying, or even worse, not even temperature, just tracking when you have your period and then you're going by, on your phone like, "Oh, I'm ovulating now," or "I'm not ovulating now." And you're not even tracking temperature, you're not tracking anything else. So, can you talk a little bit about why that's kind of dangerous territory, especially if you are trying to prevent pregnancy and using this as your only method, and why FAN is different in that it uses multiple methods and is the only way to actually, tell if you're going to ovulate beforehand versus after?
Mhm. Very simple. You can't predict ovulation. That's why those things are ineffective. We're not wind up clocks, right? We're not dolls that just do the same thing every single month. We're not wind up dolls. It um what period apps where you just put in your period, or what temperature method only apps are trying to do is they're trying to predict when you'll be fertile and when you'll ovulate. Now, the analogy I love to use for this is like the seasons. We can equate the seasons of our menstrual cycle with like the seasons of the earth. So you're like, okay, I
Mhm,
want to know what the weather is like today and whether or not I
mhm,
need to, wear a raincoat to protect myself, like a condom, right? From pregnancy. So you can take out your phone and look at what was the weather like this time last year and last time I was in this season. And it might be right. Like, it might be right. I live in Canada in April. It's like raining a lot. So it might be correct. But you could just look out the window. Just look out the window. That's the difference. The difference is, instead of relying on past information to try and predict, we are just simply going to pay attention to exactly what's happening. What is my truth in this moment? And what is my body telling me about my fertility? Because, like you said, there's so many things that influence our ovulation, our fertility, from what we're eating, where we're living, who we're dating, the moon, our stress levels, right? Like, all of these things affect our timing of ovulation and our cycle. So don't predict this information, just simply pay attention. Pay attention to your toilet paper. Take your temperature. But again, remember, temperature only confirms ovulation happened after it
mhm.
happens. And I actually have a lot to say about tech because there's a lot of pros and cons to femtech and the things that we have. And I love to call it like the gateway drug. Like, because these big companies have all this money and this marketing
Right.
power, right? They get like the word out, which is cool. So, okay, great. But like, once they like pull you in, come to the real deal now. Right? But if you're doing like temperature only methods, that's a method for sure. But know that you have to consider your entire pre-ovulatory phase fertile then.
Mhm,
So for sure, like, I coach a lot of people who only use temperature because for whatever reason they don't want to check their cervical position or their cervical mucus, or et cetera, et cetera. Or maybe they're going through a time where their cervical mucus is very confusing for them. So they use temperature. And once the temperature shifts and they confirm ovulation, then they know it's impossible for them to get pregnant. But all of those days prior to the temperature shift, they're going to consider themselves fertile, right? Because temperature does not open the fertile window, it only closes it. There's just so many, it's amazing all the gadgets out there. The apps, the only app I recommend is Read Your Body.
Okay.
If you're going to chart on an app, which for me, I just want people to find a way that brings joy to their charting routine, and it doesn't feel like, a burden. It feels like a privilege. So if that's using an app on your phone, then fantastic. Make sure your app does not have predictions, or that you can at least turn the predictions off. And make sure that your app allows you to chart cervical mucus, basal body temperature, and cervical position. You don't even have to chart all three of them, but you'll know it's a better app if it allows you to chart all three of those. I love Read Your Body because it's made by fertility awareness educators for fertility awareness people. So we get it. Like they get it. They get our needs. They get our wants. You can use any methods. So there's different kinds of methods. We haven't even talked about the different kinds of methods of fertility awareness. It's very customizable. They don't share your data with anyone. And you, and you can have all of your information there. But you have to use your app as a data collector. That's it. You have to learn. You have to take the time to learn to interpret your own cycle, right? You know your body better than an app does. You just need to take the time, whether it's through a book, whether it's a fertility awareness educator, but you have to take the time to learn how to interpret your own cycles. And then there's this other one, which I have, and I haven't actually pulled it out of the box yet, but there's this thing called KEG. Have you heard of a KEG?
No, what is that?
It's like this little egg-shaped thing with a little tail, and you actually insert it into your vagina, and it tells you if you're fertile or not, which I just think it's really funny because, it's been a while since I look into it. If anyone listening to this is interested, definitely look into it. Because I don't want to explain how it works and then be totally wrong. It's been a while since I've looked at it. But when I first heard about it, it was like, that's ridiculous, because all you need is your toilet paper. All you need is your toilet paper, and you'll see the cervical mucus on the toilet paper, and you'll know if you're fertile or not. But I've been humbled. I've been humbled in the many years that I practice and teach this. And there are definitely situations where someone's cervical mucus can be really confusing, whether it's that you have mucus every single day or you don't have mucus at all. So then that might be when I'd actually encourage someone to use something like the KEG. So that they can use, if they really want to open their fertile window with mucus, instead of considering their entire preovulatory phase fertile, then you can use KEG to help you get a further understanding of where you are. Same thing with LH strips to help you confirm ovulation. So it's incredible. It gets incredible. Like once you go down the rabbit hole of fertility awareness, for anyone listening, if they're like, whoa, okay, like overwhelm, like too much, this sounds way harder. Like, let me tell you, slow down. It simply starts with your toilet paper. Like
I love that.
You're already using this, likely every single day. And so all you have to do is the next time you go to every time you go to the bathroom, before you remove any clothing, look at your toilet paper roll in your bathroom, grab yourself a few squares, and instead of costing your vulva or something like this, fold it into a nice square cervical mucus canvas. And then take this canvas and wipe from front to back before you go to the bathroom and after. So it's just more conscious wiping, because you're already wiping. You're just doing it more mindfully. And just pay attention. How do you feel when you wipe? What do you see on the toilet paper? And can you pick anything up? And that's where it begins. And I charted my mucus only for 2 years before I added in any other sign.
Wow.
So it doesn't have to be, it can be a lot of things. It could also be very simple.
I'm so glad you said that, though, because I do feel like it can feel really overwhelming for people, especially when it can feel something so big, right? Like if you really don't want to get pregnant, then you really want to be like very sure that you're doing it correctly. And, there's all these different things and information and people on social media telling you to do all these things. And it can feel like a lot, especially when you're already busy and all of that. So I love that tip where it's just the toilet paper, start there, and you're golden. So amazing. I would love for you to just really quickly tell us, because I know this is often something that comes up. How accurate actually is FAM for preventing pregnancy? Like compared to, hormonal birth control and all of that. I know a lot of times people will joke about it, especially when they relate it to like the rhythm method or something like that and be like, oh, that's the fastest way to get pregnant and that kind of thing. And I think for women in general, it just would be helpful to hear if this is something people are interested in doing for pregnancy prevention. How accurate is this method?
Mhm. It's actually just as effective as the pill without any of the side effects. So the study that everybody quotes when we're talking about fertility awareness quotes it at now over 99%, so 99.6% effective.
Which is
Now,
amazing.
that is super amazing. Now, that being said, um, you're not those people in that study,
Right.
right? And so there are many other factors that are going to affect the effectiveness of the method, and those include which method you're actually practicing. So, for example, if you're using a period app that's trying to predict when you're fertile is very different than the highly effective symphytothermal method, which is the method we've been talking about with the mucus and the temperature. It also depends on your correct and consistent use of the method. So even if you know how the method works, but if you're not doing it, if you're not doing it, following the guidelines, then, right, that's going to reduce the effectiveness. It also depends on your ability to accurately identify your own fertile window. It's going to depend on your personal motivation and your partner's motivation to prevent pregnancy. Your experience with charting. So whether you're first learning or if you're like me and you've done this for over a decade, I always tell people to give themselves at least 3 months, of charted, ideally supervised charted cycles before using the method as contraception. What about your partner's support and cooperation and your social acceptance? That's going to affect the effectiveness of the method and how you behave during your fertile time. So great, you're able to accurately identify your fertile time, but what are you doing? So are you pulling out? Are you using a condom? Are you withdrawing or pulling out and using a condom? Are you abstaining from penis vagina sex? So how you behave during the fertile time is going to change the effectiveness. And whether or not you've received instruction and follow-up from a qualified educator. So I'd love to remind people that, like, yeah, it's super, super effective. It's over 99% effective, but as well, there's a lot of other factors to consider when we're talking about the effectiveness of fertility awareness. And something I always love to talk about too when we get onto this topic is that nothing is 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has a friend who had a baby holding the IUD, right? I know somebody who got pregnant and their tubes were tied. And the guy was told that he was infertile and they got pregnant. So like there's nothing is 100%.
Right.
And so, when we choose to engage in sexual activity and when we choose this, we always assume some amount of risk that we may get pregnant. And you know what? For anybody listening who has become pregnant, whether, unintentionally using FAM or using any other kind of contraception, like you didn't fail. Like your body did exactly what it was supposed to do, right? So when I talk about the effectiveness of the FAM or the pill, or even when I start thinking about how we're trying to control our bodies, I actually don't use that term anymore. So I will rarely call it birth control. I like to talk about it as contraception because the idea that we can control birth is totally inaccurate. That would be like trying to control the moon or to control the waves. You cannot. Our bodies are forces of nature. What we can do is we can learn to pay attention. We can learn to read the signs. I'm from Alberta. The closest thing I have to bodies of water are lakes and rivers. I'm nowhere near an ocean. So when I lived in Sayulita, Mexico, on my cycle savvy globetrotting adventures, and I wanted to surf for the first time, I didn't get into the water for days. I just sat there and watched the waves so that I could learn when was it safe to come in, when was it safe to come out. Okay, how do people do this, right? And so in the same way, we're learning and observing our own bodies. And we're making our best decision based on what we know and what information we have today. So just keep that in mind when we're thinking about the effectiveness. Yeah.
No, I'm so glad you shared that, and I really could listen to you talk about this for hours and hours and hours because it's so fascinating, and I think too, like you said, like we assume things are 100%, even when we're taking hormonal birth control, and it's not. Like I know someone in college, her mom was on birth control, and she was the result of that. So I think that's important to remember as well. And I love that reframing of calling it contraception rather than birth control because it's true. Like control is very much an illusion, and yeah, so that's really great. I would love for you to share who would you say is spam good for and who is spam maybe not good for? Like, are there any people, for example, if someone, has irregular periods or works night shifts or travels a lot or whatever, is there anyone who you're like, no, spam's not for you? So I'd love to hear your take on that before we finish up.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, FAM is for anyone who has the dedication, the commitment, and the like sovereignty in order to use it. So what I mean when I say that is number one, I hear a lot that people with irregular cycles can't use FAM. Well, of course, because you're talking about trying to predict when you're fertile. And so if the more irregular your cycles are, the less that you can predict what they're going to be. But I feel like we've talked about this a lot already today that like we don't want to be predicting nothing. So even people with irregular cycles can use FAM because you're not predicting, you're observing on what's happening for me today. In fact, if you have really irregular cycles or if you're going through, difficulties with your cycle, be it PMS, short luteal phases, period pain, etc., no mucus, too much mucus, then you probably should be practicing FAM so that you can use this information to help uncover what might be going on underneath the surface, to actually uncover the underlying cause of these issues. I teach people postpartum. Same thing after you've had a baby, you can use FAM. It's going to be, again, as you wait for your return of fertility, it's going to be a very common start and stop in your cervical mucus. So it's going to be a fun, chaotic time to chart for sure, but you totally can. I teach people how to chart since their very first period, like even at 12 years old. People who probably won't love FAM are people who don't have the capacity to pay attention and chart every single day. So for whatever reason that is, if they don't have the commitment or dedication to pay attention to their cervical mucus every day, to take their temperature every morning, to write down their observations at the end of the night, for whatever reason, if that's not something that you can do right now, FAM is probably not for you. If you have sexual partner or partners where you do not have sexual agency or decision-making on when you're having sex, FAM is probably not for you. So it requires supportive, cooperative partners. If you are experiencing symptoms in your cycle, like period pain, that is so excruciating and debilitating that you cannot live your life and you do not have the capacity to address the underlying cause in this moment at this time, you might actually prefer to continue to suppress those symptoms with the pill until you're ready to, and you have the space to do that. And again, as a fertility awareness educator, I'm not anti-pill at all. Like I get it. Like I would never say that I understand other people's situations or know what's best for other people. So if at the moment, life is good on the pill for you, then like go for it, girl. You know what I mean? So those are some situations where people probably wouldn't love to use FAM. And that being said, if you're somebody who is on hormonal birth control and you're kind of nervous to come off of it, then for whatever reason, because you're afraid that you won't be able to identify your fertile time and do it accurately, if you're afraid of symptoms returning that you've been suppressing for years, you can actually learn how to practice FAM still being on hormonal birth control. And then you get a better idea of what is required in the FAM practice, so that when you do go off the pill, you already have all of this practice, you have all of this confidence. You just wouldn't be charting an actual cycle. As long as the hormonal birth control is doing its job, then it's preventing you from ovulating, and so you don't have a cycle. So that's just like a really beautiful segue for like what we're bringing together, which I'm really excited about. And we're doing, this webinar next week about, how can you nourish your body with nutrition And how can you start to learn how to track your cycle so you can feel confident about discontinuing the pill? Because, yeah, I think a lot of people are waking up to being like, wait a second, I don't want to be on this, but now what?
Right.
Yeah.
And to have support because, like, like what happened with you, and you were just like, I guess I'll stop now and get off the pill, right? Like, there's no support really out there from your doctor or from conventional medicine that's helping women come off the pill or whatever form of contraception they're on. And a lot of women assume, like, oh, it'll just, I'll just go back to having my regular periods, or, nothing crazy is going to happen. And unfortunately, women really, really struggle with that period of time. I mean, it can be even like 6 to 9 months and even more sometimes of irregular periods and acne and PMS and all these, problems that, like you said, we're going to talk about next week in our webinar, and how to support your body in coming off contraception, because there's so much that you can do from nutrition, from lifestyle, and then tracking your cycles. Again, going back to the beginning of this podcast where we talked about, like, so you can actually know when you're ovulating, if you're ovulating, all of that, and if you're on the right track. So I'm so excited to teach that with you next week. Can you let our listeners know where they can find you, where they can connect with you before we let you go for the day?
Yeah, I teach from my name, so Chloe Skerlak. So you can find me playing. I love to share photos of cervixes and cervical mucus and menstrual blood face masks and all that jazz over on Instagram. It's just at Chloe Skerlak. My website is chloeskerlak.com. And I offer a free 30-minute call if anybody's just like, I want to share my story, I want to ask you questions, I'm curious more about the fertility awareness method, whether it's to avoid or achieve or understand yourself or your health better. So I'm happy to chat for 30 minutes online with anybody. And yeah, so I'd love to connect. So there you go.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Chloe. This was incredible. You are such a wealth of knowledge. And seriously, you guys, Chloe is the real deal. Reach out to her, take advantage of that free call. Even if you're just thinking about, doing FAM and finding out more about it. And we hope that you join us next week for our webinar, and we will see you next time.
Yay! Thanks, Leah.